welcome to the next episode of Tom and Dave Discover DotVVM. I'm Tom.
And I'm Dave. Hello.
We hope that you had a great start of this year, and we have a nice demo that we will be talking today. We will be focusing on validation, and we will show you how to build some nice components that can make the user experience a little bit better. So, Dave, what have you prepared?
Well, I prepared a very complex use case based on multiple form validations. We wanted to see if we would be able to create a sort of nice environment where you can hide and show form components and showcase how many errors are next to them, because when you have multiple forms, it's really hard to showcase all of the errors at once. Because as you can see on this one, we have collapsible panels that can be hidden from the user, and as the user clicks save, as we can click save, we can see only 2 validation errors. This is a huge problem because when we open up the billing address, there's more validation errors. So we thought it would be fun to showcase how we can not solve the issue, but how we can make the user experience a bit nicer. So that's what my showcase is about today.
Yeah. So let's look at the code. This form has 3 parts, and basically there can be validation errors in each of the parts. There's also this attendee list. We can add some rows, and if you don't fill this up and click on save, also you will see another bunch of validation errors. So, but when this section is hidden, like it's not very not clear why the save button doesn't do anything, because this alert can be visible only in the debug mode on your machine, but on the production, customers would just see this, and the save button doesn't do anything because there are some hidden validation errors. So let's dig in the code to see how the form is implemented.
Okay. I used Bootstrap for .vvm. Since it's a really nice package, we can use really nice prepared components to basically do many of the things that Bootstrap does with custom classes and custom JavaScript already all set up, all prepared for us. So it's a really nice package to use. And we have 3 collapsible panels, as we can see from the BS collapsible panel. We have a header and a content. That's basically it. Nothing too fancy, but what it does on the front end is it creates nice panels that are collapsible, and when opened up, showcase the forms.
Yeah, basically it's a combination of 2 components in Bootstrap, because they have a collapsible component, and also this panel is basically the Bootstrap card, and we are collapsing this card body. That's why this content has to contain a card body. These components, if you want to try them, if you don't have them purchased, you can use the 30 days trial. So just go to dotvvm.com, sign up for a trial so you can test these controls. Basically, I always say it's just a syntax wrapper, syntax sugar over Bootstrap, because for example, this form with 4 fields, it's basically just few lines of code. If you would be doing it in pure Bootstrap, it would be for the entire screen, because like there is a lot of nested divs with classes that you have to remember. So for this, it's a little bit more condensed, and I think it's still quite expressive, because you can see it's a form field with text box, this label, and it's bound to this property, and it automatically handles the validation, as you could see in the page. If the field is invalid, the error message will appear under the field, and there is also this icon and styling, all done by Bootstrap. It just applies some isInvalid CSS class on that element, but it's already taken care of in this control. So there is pretty complex logic inside, but for you it's just one line of code.
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. And it's nothing too fancy, because we didn't want to overcomplicate this issue since it's already so complex.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at. We have prepared, because when we talked about this, we kind of thought it would be fun to prepare 2 versions of this solution. And my solution is one where you basically don't see inside .vvm. You don't know, you don't have the package to override, and you basically just have .vvm package and you want to use it. So I've created another component, which is a validation counter component, which works next to .vvm. It's not written within .vvm, but Tom, you prepared a completely custom solution within .vvm.
Yeah, and part of it was written by Copilot. So let's see your solution first.
Yeah.
And before that, let's look at the view model, because that's also quite interesting. What we see in most applications is that making a nice structure of the view model can really simplify the experience when using .vvm, because you could see that there were like few dozens of components and bindable properties in the page, because there was a lot of fields. There is the address, information about the customer, the attendees, and these things. So if you put everything into one view model class, it would be very long. Like there would be like 20 properties or something like that. And usually the form, when you look at it, it's divided into several sections, as we can see here, because showing 20 fields to the user, it would be overwhelming. Users would have problems, difficulties to fill it correctly. So splitting it to logical sections in the UI makes sense, and for the same reason it's good to have it in the view model. So as you can see, this default view model actually contains 3 child objects: customer details model, attendee list model, and with billing address data. We could change it to billing address model, but now it's not that important. You can see these are normal objects. I'm initializing them to not have null values in the view model, and everything that is like that concerns the basic information about the customer is encapsulated here. So a nice thing also is that if 2 fields depend on each other somehow, for example, is company and company number, they affect each other, because when it's not a company, we will not be asking for company number. As you can see in the UI, when I check this checkbox, this field appear. Otherwise, it's not important. And this logic is very local just to this section. The other sections don't need to know about that. It's not their concern. So a nice thing is that you can somehow handle this relationship between the fields that are close to each other within this class, and it's not poisoning the entire view model, which would be very, very long. What I want to show here about the validation, we use standard validation attributes. So there is the required for first name and last name. And this company number is a little bit specific because it's required when it's a company. When it's not a company, this can be actually empty. And to cover these more complicated rules, you can do this thing. You can implement iValidatable object. It's also part of system component model data annotations. And in this method, you can yield return several validation errors. So because the result of validation may be multiple errors, so you have an option to return multiple results here. So what I'm doing here is that if it's a company and company number is empty, I am producing this error message. And because there is another parameter that specifies the property names of the properties that are invalid. And this is an instruction for .vvm to show the validation error and to highlight that particular field. So if you put here name of company number, which is the name of the field, local in this object, .vvm will somehow track which concrete property in the view model, which is a tree, where in this the field would be, and the field would be highlighted as well. So this is optional to put there a list of properties, but I recommend to put it there because then you can provide better user experience. So this is the customer details. Then we have the second model, and again you can see I need at least 1 attendee. So if there are no attendees, again I am returning an error, and because there is nothing better, I am attaching this error to this list of attendees. To display that in the UI, I would have to do it manually, because in the UI I have just this repeater control for the list of attendees. So this error message would not appear anywhere, only if I would have validation summary. But I can also use like DOT validator value equals, and if I use explicitly this property, attendees, then this would trigger the validation. And for example, I can say show error message text equals true, and that would show that error message. Yeah, so on the properties where you attach the validation errors, then you need to display these errors in the user interface. Yeah, so that's you need to be aware of. Yeah. Also, there are some functions that can add or remove attendees, and also it's great to have them self-contained in this small model instead of having hundreds of methods in the main view model. If the form is very complex, that can easily happen. And this is the attendee model. That's for each attendee. I also have object with validation attributes and billing address data. It's pretty simple. There is nothing special. But again, like if you enter a zip code, maybe there could be some logic that would find out what city it would be and pre-fill the value for you, or there can be some validation for the countries and states, which I omitted here. So that's great to structure the view models the same way as you split the user interface into smaller modules or areas.
Yeah, and it's also great because we can now, as we'll see, say that we want to validate only a part of the view model. Because otherwise we would have to define basically manually all of these text boxes that need to be validated, but now we can just say, oh, I want to validate this section of the view model, and we can do that because that will be really useful for our use case, because we want to showcase basically just the error count on each of the forms. That's what we are trying to solve today, because we want to see when it's collapsed, how many errors happened underneath, under the collapsed form, and we don't want to show how many total errors have happened, but how many errors happened for this particular section of the view model. So that's also a really great argument for keeping the data separate into like their own little classes and having them very well defined, because that will simplify everything very nicely.
That's true. Basically, by default, every button in .vvm would validate the entire view model, and the only way how you can scope it to not validate the entire view model is to set validation target, and validation target must be an object. It cannot be a primitive type like string or integer or something like that. It has to be an object. So it's great to structure the view model so you can say validation target is just customer details or attendee list or billing address. Yeah,
exactly.
That's important. For example, here I have in the attendees section, I have this add attendee button, and because you can add attendees, and the address, for example, you didn't get to it yet, so this might be invalid. Yeah, so that's why we have validation enabled equals false, because if I remove that and reload the page and I want to add an attendee, then like the validation would trigger for this, and also for the billing address. However, if I would like to scope the validation just for this area, I can say validation target equals, and here I have to say underscore this, because earlier I set data context to attendee list. So my current binding context is the attendee list. So validation target would be just this attendee list. Yeah. So if I do it like this and save the file and return here, now you can see I'm validating only this section, which still I don't want, but I'm not validating this or this. But if your view model is not structured into these child objects, then it's quite hard to say I want to validate only this part, because in .vvm it can only be a subtree of a view model.
Yeah, and so I've seen too many times people doing just validation enabled false on the entire view model and then somehow handling it manually, which is not a great practice because we already have the handling of validation and it's really simple to use. So I always try to like not use the validation enabled false too much, because it really depends on how you use it and when you want to use it, because overusing it, then you basically say, oh, I don't really want your validation, I want entirely mine validation, which for simple forms is not really necessary.
Sometimes it makes sense because, for example, if you want to check that this email address is unique, it's not already registered in the database, then you cannot do it using validation attributes, and you need to do it here. But so for example, if I go to here to this add method, if you want to do validation manually, you can. If you find any error, if something, then you can call this add model error. And I don't have this this namespace included, but now it should be. I need IntelliSense to see how it's used. I think it didn't.
I think we're within the attendee list, which doesn't have the
Oh
context.
yeah, you are right. Yeah, I would have to do it in this save method, which is probably a better example. Thank you.
Yeah.
So this add model error, yeah, that's the extension method, and you can specify an expression to the property which you need from the view model. So view model attendee list, it can be like the first attendee, for example, and DotVVM will somehow translate it to a position in the view model tree, and then you can attach on this property, you can attach your own error message. And if you add any errors to model state, then you need to stop the execution of the method. You don't want to save that information because it's not valid, so you need to call context fail on invalid model state. That would throw a special exception that will tell DotVVM, okay, we cannot continue, just here is the model state, return it to the client, and in the browser the user will see the validation user interface appearing, so the color text boxes and these things. So that's always necessary to call after you manipulate, after you add something in the model. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's for the sake of completeness, we covered everything that DotVVM can do with validation, I guess.
Yep.
So now how to extend it using our own components. So again, what we want to do is that if you click save and some of the sections is collapsed and there are some validation errors, you should inform user about them. So how can we do it?
Okay, so my solution is basically, if we go back to our project, my solution was without changing anything or anything that .vvm does. I added a new control, which is basic validation counter. All it does is it showcase texts. So it's a generic control with span. It showcases a badge. Badge is dangerous. It's red, so it has a red background. And this is everything because we are using Bootstrap, so we can use Bootstrap classes anywhere we want. And also it has a data binding for showcasing a path prefix. Now this is a little bit controversial as we spoke about it, because this basically means that we already understand how .vvm basically does all of the validation. You can, of course, see it very simply in our multiple form validation when we press F12. Can we press F12? Yes.
Yeah, can we?
And we can write .vvm. I hopefully have it correctly. Validation errors. And we can basically see how these errors look within the .vvm memory. And we can see that each error message has a property path to bind it to some kind of element. And we can see that the property path contains the model from from which it was called. So we can bind it to the text box within the billing address 1. So if we understand this, we can see that it's basically slash at the beginning, then object name, slash, and then the like primitive name or the string name. If we had more nested models, we would have more slashes and more sections. So given that we now understand how .vvm showcases these errors, we can then read them in JavaScript and parse them ourselves. So it's a very manual approach, very, very like not that safe, but it works for this specific use case. And we know that if we all we need is this specific use case and we need it to work for this one particular part, it will work. And if we wanted to do something more heavy, then Tom will showcase how we can modify the entire .vvm validation chain to do the same thing, but more nicely and also more safely.
Can we maybe show the control first,
Yes.
how it will look, the result, because we know how it will look, but for the viewers it's maybe a little bit hard to imagine. So CC,
Exactly.
yeah, the IntelliSense is a little bit broken here. Sorry for that. Validation counter. Counter. CO. Yeah, exactly. And we need to say path prefix. And we need to use the prefix from the validation UI. So it should be slash customer details. Yeah. It's basically the property path is basically the path how to get from the root view model to the property you want to attach the user message. So here we are setting path prefix because we are only interested in number of errors in this particular section of the form, and everything is in the customer details child object. So the path will start with slash customer details.
Yes, and we only want to see basically the first name, last name, and if is company, then has company number.
Yeah.
That's all we want to see. So now if we take a look at how it works, we can see that on save, we see 2 errors.
Yeah. So that's what the control does. Basically, it shows the number of errors. It's styled with the badge and BG danger, which are bootstrap classes to make it look like you just saw. And we don't care if the section is collapsed or expanded. Even if it's expanded, we will show the number of errors. I don't have a problem with that. But when the section is collapsed, it can be very useful for the users because they will see there is some problem in that section.
Yes, exactly. And the way it works is very manual. We check within the JavaScript for stuff that .vvm does. So this is quite a complex piece of code to understand from the first viewing. So we'll go through it line by line. So we add a new binding handler, which is validation counter.
And we talk about binding handlers a little bit in the last episode. So basically it's a way how to implement MVVM mechanisms using Knockout.js. That is a library on top of which .vvm is built in. So if you need to build an interactive component, you usually need to implement a binding handler. Yeah. So basically this init function will be called when the component appears in the page for the first time.
Yes.
So in that, we need to implement what will happen.
Exactly. Yeah. And we want to basically just set up how it will work, and then we want it to work on .vvm events. So we'll see after one line. So this path prefix is a value accessor. It reads the handler data. And we have set it up in here that we have validation counter and then just a string. That's it. Yeah. That's all the data we basically pass down to the control, and that's all we need. We don't need anything more. Yeah?
This knockout helper makes string literal because path prefix is normal C# string, and we basically need to serialize it as a JSON or like as a JavaScript string. Basically, it will add just the double quotes around that value, and we are writing it as a data bind attribute. So if we would look in the DevTools, you would see what the component, how the component looks like. here we can somehow in this exactly.
We can take a look
so
here.
it rendered a span with CSS classes, and this data bind looks like this validation counter colon and our value, and you can see it's in double quotes it's just JavaScript object, or in this case JavaScript string.
Yes,
so
exactly.
That's what we need to render in HTML, and because there is the data bind attribute that triggers knockout.js to run the validation counter binding handler and call the init function. So this is how it's wired up
exactly
together.
And on this binding handler we call init, which is the initialize function, and we get the value accessor. So this lets us read within the binding handler the data, which basically for us is just path prefix. So
just a string.
We don't need anything else.
There is a convention you have to call that value accessor, because if you don't call it, Knockout will see, okay, maybe the value is not needed, so it will not call your binding handler the next time. So a common pattern in Knockout.js, first thing you do, always read the value accessor. It's a function, so you need to call it without arguments, and it will give you the value you passed to that binding. So that's how we will read the path prefix, the string, the part of the path that we gave to our component.
Yes, exactly. And we don't want to basically interrupt anything in .vvm. We basically want to write along the .vvm events. So we want to see .vvm validation events, validation errors changed, which happens when we add or update errors or something like that.
And whenever .vvm recalculates the list of validation errors, it will trigger this event, so we can subscribe
and that's
to
a basic event, so we can subscribe to it. And when something happens, we want to change the inner HTML. It's just a span, so basically we want to clear out the text, and we can read the .vvm validation errors. And here comes the part which is a bit brittle but works a bit nicely here. We can see that we filter the errors with our path prefix by basically just saying if the path starts with the path prefix, then that's our error. That's basically all we do. We check which errors are ours, and if we have some, then we can write out within the inner HTML how many errors we found. And this is just a nice thing to say. If there's one error, we just say we found one error, and if there's multiple, we add s at the end. That's basically just nice UX.
And this syntax of the string with these templates, it's relatively new to JavaScript since I think 2017, something like that. But it's quite useful. It's similar to the interpolated strings feature in C#. So like I'm very happy when I'm using it in JavaScript because it's quite nice. Just the problem to write that backtick character on some keyboard layouts, it's not that straightforward as it could be. But like it's fine.
And then we have another nicety that's basically just saying if we haven't found any errors, we don't want to display anything. That's just for if we had some div or something like that there. We would want to hide everything if we don't have any errors.
Because that's about the styling, because even the badge which is empty in Bootstrap, it can have some border or some padding, so user would see some like red circle without any content, so it would be confusing. So if there are no errors, we will just hide the entire element.
Okay. So that's all it does. Basically showcases those two errors, and I'll showcase how it looks on the entire page, because it's a nice thing to see what we meant entirely. So we have another validation counter, and this is just for the attendee list. And we have another validation counter here for the billing address. So check keyboard.
Sorry about that.
Nah, that's okay.
Not proud of myself.
Okay, so like this. Now if we click save, we can see that the billing address also has 3 errors, and we can expand it to see what the errors are. And also we can see that it works very nicely with how dynamic our forms are. When we click save, we see that we have 9 errors within the attendee list, because each field is 1 error, so they all get counted. So that's a really nice thing.
So that event will trigger whenever .vvm basically recalculates the list of errors either on the client or some errors can come from the server. So in either case, it will do that. There is one caveat to that. In our case, it's not necessary because the control is initialized in the page immediately and it stays there forever. However, if we have some UI where this validation counter can disappear from the page, for example, if somebody set this to null, then this entire part of the page would be removed from DOM. Then this could create a memory leaks. So there is a function ko utils DOM node something disposal at thank you Copilot, something like that. I never remember it, and IntelliSense is broken for some reason here. So then I should unsubscribe this handler which I hooked up to that event. Otherwise it would be triggering this event on changing content of elements that are not part of the DOM. It's so to be 100% correct, that should be done, but not that big deal for this implementation. What is the biggest problem is this path prefix, because if you move this part of the UI to some other place, that could change, because this path prefix can be nested in some other context before. So this is not very useful if you would implement this as a component and then it could be used on anywhere in your application and you don't know where exactly it would be used. This is a problem because this is absolute path from the root of the view model to that property. And unfortunately, what we found out, DotVVM doesn't expose nice and simple methods or APIs to calculate this path for your objects. So if we want to do it properly, to be 100% bulletproof, because this is fine for a single scenario, unless you move the code from here to there, then it will be stable, it will be fine, and it solves the issue. We need to do it properly in DotVVM. And I have been playing with Copilot because we actually have quite a similar component that almost is doing what we need, and it's called validation summary. It's in the framework since its first version, and it can do what we need almost. If I use validation summary, and it will not look nice, excuse that, but like now you can see this is a little bit higher because validation summary renders UL element. And if I click on this, it will probably display the errors. However, they will not be visible. Oh, no, because by default, it's showing only, it's not looking in the children. So what I need to do in case of validation summary, include errors from children true. And then it will work. So when I click save, it will include errors from the entire view model. And I want to scope it just to this section. So let us do that. Validation target equals this. And now that's almost what we need, because now when I click save, I have these two errors. And if I would convince this control to render just the number of errors instead of the actual list of errors, that's exactly what I need. It has the flexibility I need because I can set validation target, and this would be translated correctly because it's calling internal API in .vvm that will always, no matter how complicated the hierarchy of data contexts I have here, it would calculate the correct path for me. And also it can filter to show just direct errors from direct children, because now when I have validation target, I don't need that anymore, because now it will look at the direct children of this validation target and show the error messages. So unless there are more child objects here, this would be working. but also it has more options which could be useful. So I need just a control similar to validation summary, but it would not print out the errors. It would just print out a number of errors.
Yep.
Maybe there is some CSS trick, some CSS magic I could do to visually produce what I need, but I think that it's better to have this component in the framework. And I asked Copilot to implement that. I created an issue, and then when I read it today, what I wanted, it was like 1 month ago, I also did something which I regret a little bit. So, but basically I told Copilot I need a control with logic similar to validation summary that would only print count of validation errors in the current validation target. If I would be doing that today, I would remove these 2 sentences because that's what I found out is actually not what I want. So, but Copilot took over and it implemented the component. I check out this branch and add several adjustments. So let's go through that. Basically, this is a copy of validation summary. It's copying, it's using the old-fashioned way of defining controls, not the new composite control approach, which we saw, but it renders a span element instead of UL. It has this include errors from children, include errors from target, wrapper tag name. If you want different element than span, you can do that by using this wrapper tag name. And here it's checking if the component validation is disabled, then it will not do anything, and here it will get this expression and pass it to the data bind attribute .vvm validation errors count. So similar binding handler as David created, but here it's called .vvm validation errors count, and it's just passing this expression that's basically a JavaScript expression that will somehow return the concrete object on which it should be evaluated. Yeah, so it's not that straightforward. The syntax would not be very nice. If you look how it looks like here, it's $raw data, because that's the way how on this element you can get to the observable containing the validation target that you need. But if there would be more complicated path, it would be some crazy JavaScript expression, but that .vvm can generate reliably and doesn't provide nice API to do it. And so that we pass these values, this target, and this include errors from children, include errors from target, to that binding handler, and that's it. And in this file, it added this new binding handler. And if I would expand the previous one for validation summary, it's generating li elements, passing the error messages and appending it here. And here is very similar. Most of that didn't change, just I'm just setting inner text to number of errors I have. It would be nice to have formatting as you had, that it could show 1 error, 2 errors, 5 errors, like that. That's what's not supported yet, but probably we will add some format strings for that. The pluralization can be a little bit tricky because in some weird languages, for example in Czech, there are more than 2 versions of that word. So we will have to figure out how to provide some function or number of options, or how to do that. Maybe we will leave it to the user to pass their own templating function or something like that. And so that's how it is. And then I found out that I would like to apply CSS classes to that control. I also want that hide when valid functionality, so because I don't want to show that component when there is 0 errors. But some people might want to show it even if there are 0 errors. So I think that it would be nice to use what we already have in .vvm, because in .vvm we already have properties like validation invalid CSS class equals something, so apply CSS class when this is invalid. Or there is like there is like show error message text, there is hide when valid, and these behaviors for validation. So it would be nice to be able to reuse that. So that's what I added manually, and that's what's contradicting my previous instructions to Copilot. So no wonder Copilot didn't do it, because I asked to do something else. Then I changed my mind and fixed it myself. So I'm looking at this binding handler which DotVVM produces. If I set either of these properties, so like if I set validation invalid CSS class would be, for example, is invalid, then it would produce this binding handler which would contain some object that describes that. And I'm already calling a function which we have. If there are some errors, apply that validation behavior to the element we have. Yeah, so I just reused function we have in .vvm somewhere else, and it will either add or remove CSS classes based on that.
That's the nice thing about working within the validation.ts even, because when I was writing it, I didn't want to really change the .vvm, so I, of course, also copied how the validation writeout works, but I didn't have these get validation errors methods.
Yeah.
I didn't have access to them from the user code because they are hidden within the validation TS and they are not exposed externally, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, but that's basically the reason why I went with such a manually handwritten way, because I basically didn't want to change the .vvm. So I'm glad that we can see both of these options, even the non-changing, even the changing of .vvm. So I'm really glad to see that.
And that's what I want from this episode, that you would stop being scared from cloning .vvm repo and try to improve or extend the framework yourself, because then you can just send us a pull request. We'll be happy, even if it's not 100%, even if it's not bulletproof. We will be happy to discuss that. We will be happy to make it more robust so it could get eventually into .vvm code base. So like what I want to show now is how to reference .vvm compiled from the code base directly, so you can try these things. You can copy a component, make a similar one, and try to use it as it would be part of .vvm. And once you have it, you can just create a branch and submit a pull request, and we will be very happy for it. So like let's do it, because I already cloned this branch on my machine, so I just want to use it. So let's do that. So I will add existing project in my solution, and I have cloned .vvm repo in this folder, dwork.vvm. There is a src folder for source codes, and we have a structure of projects that's a little bit complicated, but what you want to do is to use this framework, and these first 3 projects are the most important for you. Visual Studio is it's a great environment, but there are some things that I don't like, and one of them is that it doesn't handle these transitive references correctly. So I have to add a hosting ASP.NET Core project, and it depends on another project, on framework project. So I need to add it too. So I added hosting ASP.NET Core. I need to add framework.
Okay, so it doesn't find the references within the folder structure. It's on its own. You have to basically manually tell it. I know there's a transitive reference, so I'll show it to you before I even add the other things.
I will show it in I will show it in CS Proj, because like what I would need to do is just this first project, or maybe this one, but here this project says project reference is to the framework project. However, Visual Studio doesn't run .NET Restore on projects that are not directly referenced in the solution, so I would get weird compile errors. Either I could use command line to run .NET Restore in this project, and it would fix, because command line .NET Restore goes even into transitive references, because it doesn't work with the concept of solution at all. However, Visual Studio doesn't, so I need to add these 3 projects. That's a little bit annoying, but once you figure it out then and you know it and you would do it every time, then it's fine. Now, if I want to use this version of .vvm, I need to comment on this package reference. So I will remove the reference to .vvm ASP.NET Core, and I need to add reference to this .vvm framework hosting ASP.NET Cores because this package is built from this project. So like right-click, add project reference, and add this hosting ASP.NET Core. Yeah. So now instead of referencing the official version of .vvm, I am referencing my own custom build of .vvm. Be careful on this relative path, because if your colleagues don't have this project on the same relative path to your project, then it will break. Another nice thing is to use git submodules so all people have it on the same relative path, but that's for maybe for one of the next episodes. So now let's save it and let's try to run it. So I press Ctrl F5 to run it without debugger. It should recompile. If you want to compile .vvm on your machine, you will need to install yarn, because by default it's looking for yarn. So you need to have installed Node.js, which you probably have because it's installed together with Visual Studio, but then you have to install yarn, npm install yarn -g, and it should be enough. Then you should be able just to clone .vvm repo and build that project. So as you can see, the page still works, it's still the same. However, because it's my own branch where this component is already implemented, I can now use validation errors count, and like let's do it just without these bells and whistles, so just a validation target, and let's see if it works. So now I have 0 here.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Now I want to hide it when it's valid, where there is 0 errors. So I can reuse this property which we already have. So validator dot hide when valid equals true. And this will hide the component and it will appear. This is my version. This is David. It's nicer. So I'm a little bit jealous. But this appeared only when it's needed. But it's more flexible because some people might want to show even 0 errors, maybe apply different CSS classes, maybe make it green, like you're right, yeah, everything is correct. Yeah, so that's fine. And I want to apply the same classes, so at least it's at least comparably nice as David's version. So validator dot invalid CSS class, and it was batch and bg primary danger, sorry. Primary would be blue. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have it bigger, like batch large? I don't know. Let's try it.
I haven't worked with Bootstrap in a while.
No, it doesn't work. No. I will not be guessing how to make it larger. So batch danger. So now it's the same. I don't have this text templating, so I cannot display errors. Maybe using CSS, but no, I will not do that now. And but however, it works the same way, and I don't need to use this path prefix. It will respect my validation target. Actually, it's a nice idea when you have this form split into multiple sections. It's great. When I change data context, I usually also change the validation target because it will propagate to all components inside. So now it will still work, but I don't need to specify it here because I can need it on multiple places. And if I would have any button in this section, in this entire collapsible panel, it would by default validate only that section, which is usually what I want. So whenever I set data context, I usually also set validation target to underscore this because they work very nicely together. And let's make it even better, because I don't like to repeat these things here. I could set it also on the parent level. However, they would be also affecting other controls with validation, and I maybe will want different classes. If I would do that, let's try it. It would be crazy, I guess. So let's see what it will do, because this invalid CSS class would apply also to text boxes. So like how the errors look like when text box errors are badges. Not that bad, it didn't do anything, but like I still think that it's better to have it on this control. However, I will be having this control here 3 times, and I really don't want to repeat these settings here. And that's another feature what DotVVM has, and it's called server-side styles. So I can say whenever we have this control, I want these properties to be set automatically on it. And of course, on the concrete place in the page, you can override it. But by default, these two will be set on that component. So like, let's do that. So here in this .vvm startup, in configuration, you can say config.styles. And there is a Fluent API to register it. So Copilot is like a little bit suggesting me things that will not work. But I can say register a style for validation errors count. You can add additional condition like only if it's in this page, only if it has this property set to that thing. We don't need that. But then I need set.vvm property. And I can say that property is called validator.invalid CSS class, and it will be batch bg danger. And then another property, validator height when valid, and it will be true. So if I set this, I can remove these two. So I will just say validation errors count. I am in this validation target, so it will show me just number of errors in my target. So let's put it here next to David's components, and that's how we can get rid of this path prefix. So let me recompile the application. I just hit Ctrl-Shift-B to recompile. It should automatically restart. So now you can see there is nothing displayed, and now I have these.
We are missing validation targets.
We are missing validation targets. That's why it's reporting different numbers. But if I would be consistent and set validation target also here and also here, and again, I could do it with server-side styles, but because I would be generating binding expressions, that would not be that simple. So like I would not do that, because that would be very difficult, because the styles are quite limited for just kind of the usual scenarios, and because bindings are strongly typed in .vvm, this would be different for each usage, because I would have to determine the type of data context and build that binding to match that type. So that would not be easy, and there is no helper like that. I would give it this string and it would compile it as it needs, probably.
Yeah, but for simple use cases like the styles, it's a really nice thing to not think about how the styles work. Basically, anywhere I write the error count, it looks the same. So it's a really nice way to keep up with the style design guidelines of the given project. So it's a really nice thing to have.
Yeah. So now, as we can see, now the number of errors is the same, because I have the validation target set correctly, and I don't need to juggle with these path prefixes.
Yes.
Because if I move this collapsible panel to different page, different part of view model, different hierarchy, it would still work. However, these path prefixes would be broken. So that's the advantage. If you are implementing things directly in .vvm codebase, you can touch internal API, which is not exposed to public .vvm users, because usually it lacks proper validation and these things, so it would produce weird error messages. It's not that easy just to like export to that function that I want to make public, because then we should at least somehow validate what are the parameters, if it's correct, and these things. Yeah. I'm not saying that we are validating everything everywhere, because there is also like one rule: if somebody sends somewhere null, they kind of deserve occasional null reference exceptions. So like that's our philosophy in some areas where we don't expect these situations to happen that much. However, most of the public API in .vvm, we are trying to make it at least to some extent a little bulletproof.
Yeah. And for simple examples like this, where we have a component that does basically a similar thing because we can see that it reads the errors, it's a really nice thing to get into the changing of the .vvm core through something like this. Like, I know we have something similar, but I would like it to work a little bit differently, or I would like to clone it and make the insides a bit different. So it's a really nice and simple use case to see basically within how .vvm works, how those inner functions work, and basically what we can or can't change. So it's a really nice example. Yeah.
Yeah. Don't be scared to clone .vvm repo. The structure is a little bit it's a large repo. Not I'm not saying it's that trivial. However, if you just look in the CRC and framework folder, then you can see these three projects are usually what you need to reference. If you would be using the old version of .NET, you need to reference hosting OWIN, but most users, I believe, are today on ASP.NET Core. And if you want to try your things in .vvm repo, if you build a control like that, then there is a samples folder, and we have a big project, this common, where there are use cases and sample pages for all components we have for all framework features. So you can just add a page here to test your feature. Yeah, so for example, we will have I didn't commit that change yet for validation. No, I'm in complex samples. I need to be in control
Okay,
samples. There should be a validation summary, and I tried this component on one of these pages, probably the other one, this one, or maybe it's in I'm in another branch. But like I can try my components which I created. I can try it here, and then there are also UI tests.
If you change something on a component, like let's say you wanted something more within a text box or something like that, you can basically test here that everything still works within the samples, and you can see that your change didn't break everything else. So that's a really useful feature.
I found the correct branch. So in this branch, I added usage of this component in this file. And also for these samples, we have a UI tests, a bunch of tests that is using Selenium, and it will basically run the browser and will be interacting with the page, clicking into things and making sure that things that should happen actually happen. Yeah, so in order to merge this pull request in .vvm codebase, I will also have to cover this component with tests and add a few use cases where I try if the control really works and write Selenium tests to make sure that this works, because otherwise we would be adding features in the framework, and in next releases we could break them up. So everything that goes to .vvm codebase must be covered by tests. But you can just clone the repo, try to prototype something, and then send a pull request to us, and we will look at it. We can discuss with you how to fine-tune it to be able to be merged in the code base. And also it's possible to, if you want to share your version of .vvm with your colleagues, you can also create an internal NuGet package, internal release of .vvm for your own purposes, and you can distribute it in the company. We just recommend to submit the branch to our repo so it would be merged somewhere, because to have and maintain your own build of .vvm, it can be quite a lot of work, because we commit to the repository quite often, and you would be missing out our things that we add there. So I encourage everyone to try cloning .vvm repo, try to find a similar control and try to use it as a template to make something nice, and then share it with us, because you might be in our group of .vvm contributors.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we will be doing and what we will do next.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so we have 1 month to figure it out.
Yes.
So we hope that you enjoyed this episode. Subscribe to our .vvm channel and see you next month with Tom and Dave discover .vvm.
Yeah.